About almost a year and a half ago, your previous council authorized an exploration of what it means to become an open and affirming church. And since then, we have had an ongoing film series, which many of you have participated in. We have had a 6-week Bible study with more than a dozen participants. We have had a couple of messages from me from the pulpit. And I've had personal conversation with really more than half of our rostered members. And I was encouraged in those conversations because I had 2 people tell me they still weren't sure about this whole topic, and all the rest said absolutely. So it feels to me like we're on the verge of something new and exciting and significant here at St. John United Church of Christ. So in 3 weeks, on November 8th, we're going to vote on a resolution that your current council passed unanimously at its October meeting. And at the end of the service, or probably during the offering time, I'm going to pass out a copy of that resolution so that you can look at it, have time to study it, and it will also be in our bulletins for the next 2 weeks. So as part of that continuing discussion, I've invited Doug to share his story today, the story of one man's growth toward identity as a gay man of faith. So, and I'm hoping that this conversation will also become a model for future sharing and future testimony. We need to know and understand each other's stories. It's the only way we're going to break down that outmoded silo of thinking that says faith is a private matter just between me and God. Faith is a matter to be lived out in community. And the way we do that is by sharing with each other our journeys, our stories, so that others might too be lifted up by that sharing. So we begin that process today. Now, just like the model that I was trying to share with the girls, when you have guests over for a family dinner, a gathering, a celebration, or maybe you're just meeting somebody for lunch or coffee, one of the first things you do is to share some tidbits of information with one another. Who are you? Where are you from? How did you get to this point in time? So Doug, I'd like to begin by asking you just to share a few basic facts of your story. Where are you from? Size of your family? Where'd you go to school? Those kinds of things.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Well, originally, I am from Knoxville, Tennessee. I was born just right outside there at University of Tennessee Hospital.
Big Orange.
Yes, yes. I still have to root for Tennessee or my parents would disown me. So that's the big one.
Well, you're still forgiven.
I can't understand her. He's speaking too quickly.
Okay, I'll try to slow down a little bit. I was born originally in Knoxville, Tennessee, at the University of Tennessee Hospital. My parents still live just right outside the Knoxville area, and so does my sister. I have one older sister.
One older sister? Mm-hmm. Okay. Are you an uncle?
No.
Okay, all right. Where'd you go to school?
I went to school at Powell High School in the area where I spent 18 years in that particular area before I left and went to join the Air Force.
And what led you to go into the Air Force?
Well, after I graduated high school, I tried one semester of college. I found that I really wasn't prepared and ready for it. So I withdrew from that and then joined the Air Force after that. Plus, military service has been a long tradition in my family. I serve, my dad served in Vietnam, my grandparents, both my grandfathers served in World War II, and we have historical records that go back to our first generation serving in the War of 1812, and
Wow.
everyone has served, every male in my family has served in the military at that point.
Where are some of the places you've served?
My first duty station was Charleston, South Carolina, which is where I now call home. And then I spent a couple of years in Japan, spent a few years in New Mexico, spent a year in Iraq, and here, those are my permanent duty stations, but I've also been to Saudi Arabia and Germany and Ireland, to some of the other places.
Wow. Talk about when you first came to understand that you were gay.
Well, growing up as a kid, I guess you could say I always felt that I was different from everybody else, but, as a kid, you really don't understand how and why.
Mm-hmm.
It really isn't, I think, until as an adult looking back that, I realized that's really where that comes from. But you don't really understand it as you're growing up. And then, when I was in high school, I began to acknowledge that, it's that I'm gay, but I never really acknowledged it publicly or anything like that until I had joined the Air Force and left home.
How did your parents react when you told them?
Initially, they weren't very thrilled about it. My mom totally understood because she's a nurse, so she has a scientific background, so she knows, it's not really a choice. You're born gay. That's just who you are. So it really wasn't so much with her a matter of, we disagree with your lifestyle choice, like a lot of things you hear. It was more of we're sad because no parent wants to see their child face the kind of struggles that LGBT people kind of face in this world.
How did those struggles play out during your military service?
Well, when I joined, obviously Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in place, and I served in the military for 15 years under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, and that's a pretty difficult thing to do. The way that the policy was enacted, and that the way that military members who were gay had to live, forced them to either have a double life, to where their professional life was completely separate from their private life, meaning that you really had no interactions with any of your coworkers outside of the office or anything like that, or you just had to totally shut yourself down and insulate yourself and try not to acknowledge or do anything that would lead them to suspect that you were gay, so that they would initiate an investigation and then discharge you. Essentially, they would fire you for being just who you are.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have any conversations at work with the things that I might have done on the weekend. I couldn't have any pictures or anything like that on my desk, like my married coworkers or anything like that. And Don't Ask, Don't Tell really was kind of a myth in the regard that it provided a security net for gay military members to serve, because whenever you arrived at a duty station, one of the first things that anybody asks you, whether it's your first sergeant or your commander, is about family, and they want to know, are you married? Do you have any kids or anything like that? And given the way that the laws were and the rules were at the time, the question, are you married, is also a tacit way of saying, are you straight?
Mm-hmm. How has that changed today, or has it?
It has. I actually have conversations at work now with things that Justin and I do on the weekends, things that we have planned to do. My coworkers currently are accepting of it. They love it. It's just another day at the office for a lot of folks. Most of the people I work with and for are retired military civilians, civil servants. And so they've been in the military. They understand what the life itself is like. It's really a totally different type of climate these days.
How did your faith, let me back up for a second. Talk a little bit about your experience of faith in both from high school and then as it matured, and then how did that faith experience assist you during your time in the military when you were still sub rosa, so to speak?
That's a big one. I've always been a person of faith. Faith has always been a large part of life and who I am. I have my grandmother, I think, to thank for that a lot. I remember as a kid sitting on the arm of the chair in their house, and my grandmother would read me passages from the Bible as I was growing up and everything. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. My family has deep connections to the area where they live. In fact, my parents were married at that church that I grew up in, and my family gave the initial land grant to the church when they built it back in, I think, 1880 is when the church was originally erected. Now, trying to square that circle of growing up and knowing that you're different, but yet not knowing exactly how you're different, but then when you're reaching into high school and you're starting to understand ways of that, and then trying to mesh that with the message that you're hearing from the pulpit is pretty trying sometimes. There was a lot of things that I were feeling internally that I was being told were not correct or were against what God's message and God's will was.
Talk about your experience here since coming to St. John.
This experience has been wonderful. Justin and I, when we first got here, we wanted to look for an open and affirming church. But the resources out there, which usually allow lots of folks to find those kinds of churches, are pretty sparse in this area. There's really not many churches here that advertise or put themselves out as an opening and affirming church. So when we got here, we tried to do some research to find out some churches that we knew were open and affirming. And we came here essentially as a cold call. Because a lot of the churches here don't advertise or say whether they're welcoming or not, when you walk in the door at the narthex and into the church, you don't know what you're going to get. And so it was a nervous day. We really didn't know whether we would be welcomed here or whether we would find acceptance and love here. But we have found nothing but, actually. And actually, the first sermon that we were, for that first Sunday that we were here, I remember you mentioned something in your sermon about the love of gays and lesbians and their relationships. And then after that, that day, there was a chili cook-off. And we had some chili and we stayed for that, and we felt nothing but an embrace of love and acceptance, and we didn't go anywhere else.
Good. See, you did good. Why is it important for this church or any church to label itself as an open and affirming congregation?
Well, like I said, very few, if any, of the churches around here do that. And for a gay person or any LGBT person to come in, it's essentially a cold call. You don't know when you walk through those front doors if you're going to find, a family that welcomes you and folds you into their arms and says, "You're welcome here, and we love you," or whether you're just going to get a Heisman and we're sorry, we don't think you're a good fit for this church, which, in my opinion, is contrary to God's message completely. But you don't know if you're going to find that or not. So it's important for churches to let people know that you're welcome here, and we love you, and we accept you.
Do you feel you still carry some wounds or scars from your journey thus far?
If you had asked me that before we started doing some of the research to build up to this conversation, I would have said very few, if any. But as when we initially started the project, and the deeper I dug inside myself, the more that I discovered, I think I have some more healing to do too. So I would say yes, I do. I'm more, I think, defensive about certain things than other people would be. I'm a little bit more closed off still than some other people might be. And I think that all has to do with some of that. I think, yeah, those scars are still there. And yeah, I have wounds.
Look ahead a little bit. I know you've gone back to school and that sort of thing. Share a little bit about that and what your plans are for post-military life.
Well, I'm finishing up the last prerequisites for a nursing program for me. I plan on going into nursing. It's kind of a family tradition as well. As I mentioned that my mother was a nurse. I have two cousins that are nurses as well. So my dad is the only outlier as an accountant, but the most of my family are either teachers or nurses. And I think much like ministry, nursing is a calling that, and I feel drawn to help and assist people in their lives and help them be healthier and better people. And so I'm finishing up that. I plan on trying to go to the Medical University of South Carolina down in Charleston. When I retire, we're planning on moving back to where that's home now for us.
Well, I guess we're going to have to take a vote on whether to let him go or not. Anything else you would like to share as we wind down this conversation?
Just that Justin and I are so appreciative of the fact that we have come here and we love all of you guys. You guys have provided us such a home that we didn't know we were going to find here or even when we came through those front doors. It's a bit traumatic when you're trying to find a place to find a spiritual home and you really don't know what you're going to get when you go through the doors. And we were so surprised and so welcome. And it's just thank you. That's really, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And welcome home.
Thank you.